For decades, Gatcombe Park stood as a tranquil royal estate, but beneath its pastoral charm lay a legal enigma buried in silence. What if this historic home, believed to be tethered to the crown, was never truly part of its grip at all? This section uncovers the quiet whispers and unspoken truths that hinted something monumental had been hidden, and Princess Anne had always known. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Nestled in the quiet folds of Gloucestershire, Gatcombe Park has long been seen as nothing more than Princess Anne's countryside retreat, modest by royal standards, yet deeply personal. But behind the ivy-covered walls and its outward serenity, the estate concealed something far more powerful. A quiet rebellion, decades in the making. From the beginning, Anne resisted the notion that her life, or the lives of her children, should be dictated by palace expectation. While the public believed Gatcombe was part of the royal portfolio, Anne was already laying down roots of autonomy. Legal whispers began as early as the 1980s, when Anne initiated a series of confidential meetings with private legal counsel to structure something quietly radical. Not only did she intend to own the estate outright, she wanted to protect it from royal claws permanently. While other senior royals tied their estates into royal trusts or relied on crown estate stipends, Anne moved silently in the opposite direction. Deeds were drawn up, separate from traditional royal paperwork. A firewall of legal protections was built, brick by invisible brick. Zara and Peter were kept deliberately distanced from titles and the public duties their cousins were born into. It wasn't neglect, it was strategy. Every document she filed, every decision she made, was a subtle message to the monarchy itself. My children will not be collateral, and Gatcombe would be their sanctuary beyond the monarchy's reach. For years, the paperwork remained untouched and unchallenged, hidden behind obscure legal channels. No official claim from the crown was ever made. No attempt to fold Gatcombe into the sovereign estate was documented, and that in itself was peculiar. Unlike Sandringham or Balmoral, Gatcombe seemed to slip through the bureaucratic cracks, as if it didn't quite belong, neither fully royal nor entirely private. Then came the twist no one saw coming. A retired royal archivist, combing through boxes of forgotten legal files for a memoir, stumbled across an anomaly. A missing transfer, a loophole, and Anne's name signed with an unusually personal clause. Suddenly, the estate's legal ambiguity wasn't a footnote, it was a revelation. Whispers grew louder. Journalists began to revisit Anne's cryptic 1992 remark during a rare interview. When asked about the estate's future, she had paused, smiled tightly and replied, "This house was never theirs to take." At the time, it seemed defiant. Now, it sounded prophetic. That single sentence echoed like a warning shot fired decades early. Was Anne playing a long game none of them could see? But no one, not even the most seasoned royal observers, expected the explosive proof to come not from Buckingham Palace, but from a sealed envelope in a barrister's vault. When the Royal Legal Office received a couriered package marked private to be opened only in crisis, no one imagined its contents would unravel decades of royal property assumptions. Inside, a legal confession, a signed transfer, and a clause Anne had protected with her life, proving Gatcombe was never the crown's to claim. It arrived on an otherwise uneventful morning, dropped silently at the side entrance of the Royal Legal Office. No signature, no return address, just a heavy, sealed envelope stamped with a crimson insignia that hadn't been seen since the early 1980s. Security swept the building, fearing a breach. But the truth inside was far more destabilizing than any outside threat. When the envelope was opened under strict confidentiality, 3 documents changed everything. The first, a notarized deed, transferring Gatcombe Park's legal ownership to Zara Phillips. The second, a private clause drafted by Anne's legal counsel, shielding the estate from crown absorption. And the third, a personal legal letter, dated and signed, confirming that the Queen herself had acknowledged the transfer. Each document had been prepared decades prior, placed into legal stasis, and released only now, triggered by conditions Anne herself had crafted in the shadow of doubt and foresight. Lawyers scanned the paperwork in disbelief. Every detail had been meticulously prepared. The deed outlined specific protections from future monarchs, ensuring that not even a change in sovereign power could override the transfer. The exemption clause declared that Gatcombe was never to be listed as a royal asset, nor its value counted in any future estate audit. And there, in bold ink, the name Zara Ann Elizabeth Tindall was etched as the irrevocable beneficiary no matter what shifts occurred in royal structure or succession. What shocked the legal team even more was the simplicity of it all. It had been legal, ironclad, hidden in plain sight. They'd never even questioned it because no one had ever dared. But the most astonishing revelation was the date. The deed was executed in 1981, shortly after Anne's marriage to Mark Phillips, and only months after she received Gatcombe Park as a wedding gift presumed to be from the Queen. But behind closed doors, a different arrangement had been made. Queen Elizabeth, often seen as stoic and immovable, had quietly approved a unique clause, allowing Anne to take complete personal ownership with rights to pass it down outside of royal trusteeship. It was a loophole, a rare crack in the stone wall of monarchy that Anne used with precision, and now, after years of silence, it had surfaced. The palace's response was immediate disbelief. A full review was launched, lawyers were recalled, verifications were demanded. How could something this consequential have escaped royal oversight? How could Zara, a non-working royal, suddenly hold legal claim to a royal estate without the knowledge or permission of the crown? Questions exploded behind palace doors. Camilla, court of R&D, allegedly called it a dangerous precedent. Even Charles reportedly asked his advisers, "Is this even possible?" But the documents were flawless, witnessed, sealed, filed, untouchable. What followed was not just legal validation, it was a storm of reaction, resentment, and a royal reckoning long overdue. Behind the composed face of the Princess Royal lies a woman who fought quietly, fiercely, and relentlessly for her daughter's future and her own dignity. For years Anne stood alone, resisting the crown's slow encroachment. Now the world would finally understand the price she paid to protect her truth. From the moment Gatcombe Park was placed in her hands, Anne understood what it represented. It wasn't just a wedding gift, it wasn't just a patch of royal land to retire into, it was a boundary, her line in the sand, and she knew, even then, that it wouldn't be left untouched forever. Anne had seen the way the crown operated, how it absorbed everything in its path, even family. Estates, identities, autonomy, all could be swallowed into the machine of monarchy. She wouldn't allow that to happen here. So quietly, without drama, she began to build a wall no one could see. Legal layers, discreet counsel, protections that required no announcement. She anticipated the eventual questions, the challenges, the subtle attempts to claim what she had forged as hers. She didn't scream or threaten. She planned. By the mid-1990s, whispers had already begun behind palace doors. Some senior advisers nudged Charles, then still the Prince of Wales, to encourage Anne to formalise her estate, tying it back under royal oversight for the sake of future stability. But Anne wouldn't hear of it. She refused even the suggestion. Her replies were cool, controlled, and final. Every attempt was quietly blocked. And when the suggestion arose that Zara and Peter should receive titles to secure their place in the monarchy, Anne slammed that door shut without hesitation. To her, that was the first thread in a web she had no intention of letting her children be caught in. The palace viewed her decisions as cold, but in truth, they were born of fire of a fierce instinct to protect, to shield, and to preserve something untouched by royal politics. Over time, Anne's resistance created friction. She was never one to play royal games, but now the distance widened. Her relationship with certain senior courtiers soured, and tensions with Charles grew frostier behind the scenes. She was seen as stubborn, defiant, even ungrateful. But Anne kept her counsel and her course. To her, the isolation was worth the outcome. Gatcombe Park would not become another trophy in the monarchy's collection. It would remain a legacy for Zara, an inheritance shaped not by status, but by intention. Privately, Anne shared her fears with only a select few. One close confidant remembers her saying, "They'll come for it one day, maybe not now, maybe not while I'm alive, but they will." That single statement was both warning and prophecy. She didn't speak it with fear, but with certainty. Anne wasn't waiting for permission. She was building protection. Every choice, every signed document, was an act of resistance. And now, as the legal documents surfaced and the truth became impossible to ignore, the world finally saw not just a princess, but a strategist, a mother, and a woman who had never once needed the approval of a crown to stand her ground. And as the legal truth became undeniable, Zara Tindall stepped forward, not as a pawn of the firm, but as the rightful heir her mother always knew she was. When lawyers confirmed Zara Tindall's undisputed ownership of Gatcombe Park, royal insiders panicked. This wasn't just about property, it was about power, succession, and defiance. For the first time in modern royal history, a non-titled descendant legally outmaneuvered the crown. What had once been dismissed as a minor royal estate suddenly erupted into the centre of a constitutional storm. The headlines came first, loud, fast, and merciless. Zara Tindall owns what the crown cannot touch. But it was the silence from inside the palace that revealed the true weight of the moment. No official statements, no immediate denial, just a vacuum that reeked of disbelief and fury. Behind closed doors, Charles was said to be livid. Camilla, according to palace aides, called the entire situation a calculated embarrassment. For a monarchy built on hierarchy, visibility, and unshakable control, this legal outcome shattered a centuries-old presumption that all roads eventually lead back to the firm. This was different. This was a royal descendant standing outside the gilded frame, unbound, untitled, and yet legally victorious. Zara, through nothing but the structure her mother had built, now held full, irrevocable ownership of land the monarchy could not reclaim. Not through lineage, not through influence, not even through royal prerogative. And in that single revelation, the quiet line between working and independent royals was dragged into the spotlight. The contrast was staggering. While others toiled under royal duties, Zara, never formally a princess, now stood as the only royal offspring with a sealed legacy beyond the monarchy's grip. Some whispered this wasn't a coincidence, that Anne had prepared Zara all along. From the refusal of titles to the insistence on an equestrian career far from royal constraints, Anne had quietly sculpted a daughter who could thrive beyond the firm's reach. And now, with the estate secured, those decisions felt less like rebellion and more like foresight. The media speculated, but it was the tension inside the palace that told the deeper story. Staff reported an air of quiet hostility between departments. The notion that someone from the bloodline could be elevated in power and privacy without royal consent sent shockwaves through the institution. Yet amidst the confusion, one unexpected shift emerged. William and Catherine, often caught between tradition and transformation, didn't protest. In fact, insiders suggest they expressed subtle support. Catherine reportedly remarked in private, "She's earned her place, with or without the title." William's silence, too, spoke volumes. Rather than echoing Charles's discontent, he stepped back, refusing to challenge Zara's position. The generational divide was becoming unmissable. Where the older royals saw a loss of structure, the younger ones perhaps saw an evolution. Still, the unease only deepened. The gap between titled and untitled royals, the visible and the autonomous, began to widen. And for those within the firm who had built their lives around rules, service, and protocol, Zara's quiet triumph was more than unsettling. It was threatening, because if she could hold land independent of the crown, what else could she stand to claim in the future? But as royal courtiers scrambled to contain the fallout, an older voice emerged from the shadows, someone who knew this day might come. What if the late Queen Elizabeth II not only knew about the Gatcombe Park clause but approved it? A private diary entry, long protected, revealed Her Majesty's most personal thoughts about Anne, Zara, and the crown's evolving future. The monarchy, by its very nature, thrives on silence. But buried deep within the archives of that silence was a voice no one expected to echo Queen Elizabeth's. For years, speculation had swirled about whether the monarch had been aware of Princess Anne's unorthodox legal manoeuvres. Some believed she would have never allowed it. Others whispered that the Queen's respect for Anne had always run deeper than protocol suggested. But everything changed when a former royal aide, now retired and removed from palace chains, came forward with something that would upend the official narrative, a glimpse into the Queen's private reflections. Notes handwritten, unfiltered, kept not for the public eye, but for the Queen's own reckoning, with the legacy she would one day leave behind. Among the quiet, poignant entries was a single line that struck like thunder: "Anne deserves a freedom I never had." It wasn't just a sentimental phrase. It was a revelation, a confession that the Queen, bound by tradition her entire life, had seen something different in her daughter's path. The aide, who had been entrusted with sorting through the Queen's personal effects following her passing, admitted that a sealed folder had been marked specif, Eckley, for Anne's eyes only. But fate had other plans. The contents of that folder were never delivered. They remained hidden until now. Contained within that folder was also a reference to a conversation between the Queen and Anne in 1980, shortly before Anne's wedding to Mark Phillips. According to the diary, the Queen had met with Anne in private, with no secretaries present, to discuss the long-term implications of property, titles, and choice. The Queen, having seen how the institution consumed even its strongest, offered something quietly revolutionary: the freedom for Anne to take full ownership of Gatcombe Park with no strings, no claims, no interference. It was the beginning of the clause that would one day vindicate them both. Buckingham Palace has refused to comment on the existence of these diary pages. No confirmation, no denial, just silence. But legal analysts now argue that the Queen's private approval, matched with her constitutional authority at the time, made the clause not only valid, but irrevocable. It wasn't just Anne's legal brilliance at play. It was a mother's gift to a daughter, a sovereign's final act of trust, cloaked in privacy. For Zara, the emotional weight of this truth was overwhelming. In a rare private interview, her voice cracked as she said, "She believed in us, even when no one else did." That single sentence pierced through generations of royal detachment. It wasn't about land anymore, it was about legacy, the quiet acknowledgement that love, real love, sometimes meant protecting someone not with power, but with release. Yet even the Queen's quiet blessing could not stop what came next, the challenge from within the family that threatened to rip everything apart. King Charles, blindsided and wounded, held a secret legal summit to explore reversing Zara's claim. Surrounded by loyalists and legal hawks, he found himself torn between the Crown's interests and his sister's unwavering will. For once, emotion clashed violently with duty. Inside the secluded halls of Sandringham, away from the eyes of the press and even trusted aides, a high-stakes meeting unfolded. The mood was heavy, the stakes undeniable. Charles, a monarch still adjusting to the full weight of his crown, sat flanked by royal legal advisers, property experts, and two of his oldest confidants. The question on the table was sharp and simple. Could the Crown reverse Zara Tindall's ownership of Gatcombe Park? What had once been seen as a harmless deviation from tradition had now become a dangerous precedent. If Zara, without title or duty, could possess land untouchable by the monarchy, what message did that send to the rest of the royal family and the world? Charles, usually composed, had been deeply shaken. Reports suggest he scribbled a furious note during the early stages of the discussion. This was never supposed to happen. The page was torn, crumpled, and discarded, but it captured the storm brewing within. He wasn't just grappling with legal complexity, he was confronting a personal rupture. His sister, Anne, had done something he hadn't anticipated. She had outmaneuvered the system, not out of spite, but out of principle. And now, her daughter stood in a position of undeniable power that didn't originate from the throne. Camilla, ever strategic, pushed a counteroffer. If the clause couldn't be revoked, perhaps symbolic company. Compensation could be offered, an elevation of Zara's public standing, a royal gesture of inclusion, anything to dilute the message that the monarchy had been bested. But Charles knew Anne too well. Such gestures would be rejected outright, seen as an insult rather than an olive branch. Still, he allowed the conversation to continue. Some advisers whispered about a quiet legal appeal, others proposed a reshuffling of estate classifications. But as the hours dragged on, one truth kept rising to the surface: Zara's ownership was unassailable. William, brought into the meeting as a future king and current stabilizer, remained eerily silent. He refused to side with his father or with Anne. His loyalty was spread thin, and perhaps in that moment his silence was his only strength. To speak would be to fracture something deeper than law. It would splinter family, and William, unlike many in that room, understood the cost of royal division. At the end of the summit, Charles stood and dismissed further discussion. The clause would stand. The battle was over. He would not fight his sister in the courts. But it was a decision that came with a cost, a wound he wouldn't forget. As he left the room, one aide overheard him muttering under his breath, "She played the long game, and she won." And as the crown reluctantly retreated, Princess Anne stood taller than ever until an unexpected figure tried to claim credit for it all. Just as the dust began to settle, a shocking betrayal rocked the family again. A senior royal figure leaked false documents claiming they had helped secure Gatcombe for Zara. But Anne's fury would not be silenced, and the truth behind the betrayal was far darker than anyone imagined. In the quiet after the storm, as the royal household reluctantly began to absorb the reality of Zara's triumph, a new narrative emerged, one that no one saw coming, and no one believed at first. An anonymous dossier, delivered to select media outlets under the veil of a royal insider, painted an entirely different picture. According to these documents, Zara's legal victory had not been orchestrated solely by Anne. The papers claimed that another senior royal, allegedly with decisive influence, had helped facilitate the Gatcombe clause decades ago. The documents cited a cooperative family effort, strategically designed to protect assets for the younger generation. At first glance, it seemed like a benign attempt to reframe history, but those inside the palace knew better. This wasn't cooperation, it was a calculated hijack of legacy. Within hours, whispers of suspicion turned to certainty. Palace investigators quietly traced the leak. The source? A cousin with long, fraught ties to Anne, one who had always resided on the periphery of royal relevance. Though their public image was one of loyalty and discretion, behind closed doors resentment had simmered for years. Anne's principled independence, her ironclad public respect, and now her daughter's uncontested win had all become too much for this shadowed figure to tolerate. So they reached for the one thing they could still manipulate: perception. By inserting themselves into the story, they sought to rewrite the ending, to become a hidden architect of success they had nothing to do with. But Princess Anne was having none of it. In a private confrontation that has since become legend among lace staff, Anne confronted the relative with a cold finality few had ever seen. Eyewitnesses say she looked them dead in the eye and declared, "You never lifted a finger. Don't you dare pretend you built what I bled for." The moment didn't just reveal a lie, it exposed a crack in the royal foundation that would never fully heal. Trust, already fragile, shattered in that instant. The royal press office, under growing public scrutiny, was forced to issue a rare and pointed correction. It stated unequivocally that no other family member had contributed to the legal structuring of Gatcombe's ownership outside of Princess Anne and her private counsel. The correction didn't just clear Anne's name, it dismantled the illusion that the family stood united in Zara's victory. What remained was a portrait of isolation and betrayal, a family drifting further apart under the weight of power plays and bruised egos. In the aftermath, invitations were withdrawn, communications were cut, a polite silence fell across official events where once there had been warmth. The betrayal didn't just damage a legacy, it scorched the fragile network of loyalty that barely held the royal structure together. But in the wake of lies, Zara did something no one expected. She made a public stand, and her words would echo across the monarchy. Zara Tindall had stayed silent through the storm, but when she finally spoke, the world stopped to listen. In a rare and raw interview, she revealed the weight of her inheritance, her loyalty to her mother, and her quiet rebellion against the crown that never truly embraced her. The broadcast was scheduled with little fanfare, but within minutes, millions were watching. The princess who was never called a princess, the royal who never carried a title, now sat before the world unfiltered, poised, and finally ready to speak. Zara didn't deliver her words with bitterness. There was no tricks, just truth. She began by acknowledging what many had whispered for years, that her upbringing was designed not as a rejection of royalty, but as protection from it. She spoke about her mother not as a royal, but as a woman who sacrificed position for principle. With a trembling voice, she recalled the early years when Anne refused to allow her children to be absorbed, shielding them from the performance of monarchy and the burden of expectation. And then she paused, looked into the camera, and said what would echo across headlines for weeks. This wasn't about land. It was about respect. With that one sentence, she reframed everything. Gatcombe Park was never about wealth or prestige. It was about legacy on her mother's terms, about owning a future no one else could manipulate. Zara made it clear this was not a moment of conquest. It was a moment of recognition, a moment that had been earned through decades of silence, strategy, and strength. She praised Anne not just for what she gave, but for what she protected. And in doing so, Zara revealed the heavy crown of independence she had carried for years. The interviewer pressed gently on whether Zara would now consider stepping into a more public, titled role. Her answer was instant, no. She had no intention of taking on a title. Not now, not ever. "I didn't need one to get here," she said, "and I don't need one to stand tall." Her words landed like thunder, a royal descendant, backed by unshakable legal authority, refusing to bend to the very system that once excluded her. But perhaps the most daring moments came when she peeled back the curtain on the inner workings of the firm. Without naming names, she described corridors of power where silence is currency, and decisions made not for family, but for image. Her subtle but cutting reflections on the cold calculations within the monarchy sent ripples through the palace. It was diplomacy wrapped in defiance. In the hours following the interview, social media exploded. Public sentiment shifted decisively in her favor. Hashtags trended globally. Editorials hailed her as the royal Britain didn't know it needed. Young women, in particular, rallied to her voice, one that spoke of self-worth, identity, and strength without validation from a crown. But even as Zara takes her place in royal history, one final twist awaits, a document sealed by Princess Anne for a day like this. The final document, hidden in Anne's private vault, held her last word on Gatcombe Park and her vision for the future. It wasn't just about property, it was about ending the cycle of control, reclaiming her autonomy, and ensuring Zara would never be forced to bow to a crown she didn't choose. It had been locked away for over a decade, untouched, sealed in a leather-bound envelope marked only with Anne's crest and a short handwritten phrase, "For Zara, when it matters most." The key to that vault had remained in Anne's possession through triumphs and betrayals, through changing reigns and personal upheavals. But when the time came when the world had finally heard Zara's voice, when the storm had passed and the dust began to settle, Anne knew the moment had arrived. Inside that envelope was a letter, but not just any letter. It was her final testimony, her unfiltered declaration of legacy. It began with words that struck like thunder wrapped in love. "You were always meant to be free." Anne's letter spoke not in royal formality, but in fierce maternal pride. She wrote of the weight she carried alone, of the nights she lay awake wondering whether history would forgive her choices, whether the family would ever understand. She confessed the pain of being called cold, distant, rebellious, all for choosing her daughter's freedom over tradition's chains. But more than that, she wrote of the future. Enclosed with the letter was a document, fully executed and legally binding, transferring permanent stewardship of Gatcombe Park not only to Zara, but to her children, ensuring that no monarch, no matter how ambitious or resentful, could ever unpick the independence Anne had fought to enshrine. The document had been drafted in secrecy, countersigned by a private notary, and witnessed by 2 trusted aides sworn to silence. One of those aides later revealed, through tears, how Anne had wept silently when pressing her signature to the final page. It was a rare moment of vulnerability from the woman known for her stoicism, a testament to just how much this final act meant. She wasn't just signing away land, she was signing a declaration of rebellion, love, and protection that would echo through generations. When Zara received the letter, she reportedly held it to her chest before reading it. Later, in a closed-door statement to her inner circle, she whispered, "This is more than an inheritance. It's a promise." The monarchy, sensing the emotional and symbolic magnitude, responded with rare grace. King Charles, despite the tension that had long lingered between the siblings, issued a private memorandum acknowledging the document with full support. No challenge, no hesitation. Just a signature beneath Anne's finally uniting the crown with her cause, even if quietly. And so, the saga of Gatcombe came to rest not in scandal, but in sovereignty. Anne did not seek glory. She did not ask for applause. But she walked away not only vindicated, not only respected, but legendary. The woman who never chased a throne, never needed a crown, had managed to reshape what power truly meant within the House of Windsor. She didn't burn down the system, she carved out an escape from it. And as the gates of Gatcombe close quietly once more, one truth remains unshaken. Princess Anne never needed a throne to change the monarchy forever. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.